Hello there, commanders, and welcome to another Total War Arena news update, and rather a discussion about the news update that we just had in the previous video, because I'm Mischief from the future that has decided that I should split this video into two parts, the news part and the discussion part. So this is the discussion part. If you want to hear the news in the original form, I guess, head on over to the previous video, a link to that in the top right corner for you if you haven't seen it, and then come here, listen to my feedback about the changes. Or, well, this video is pretty much standalone, so you can just watch this one, no big deal. And yeah, provide your feedback here. Please, that is the correct video to provide feedback on if you want to have your voice heard by CA. So, well, take it away, past Mistru. Those are the news. Leave your comments with feedback below, and if you want to listen to my discussion, to my feedback essentially about it, and then base your feedback off of it, or just, argue against my arguments, or maybe, state to CA that you feel the same way as I do, or similar at least, that would also be very helpful, because I also have seen that people are very often eager to jump into arguing against, but if somebody actually agrees, they don't really say they agree, and then CA could read that as like, oh, nobody agrees with him, and everybody is only against him, so, well, the sentiment of the overall community must be the opposite, right? Of what it actually is. So, yeah, if you agree with someone when it comes to feedback, make sure that you just let your voice be heard, because what they also look at is, number of people that share the same sentiment, because they want to make the largest amount of population happy, right? And they want to introduce popular changes rather than what necessarily they think would be the best, right? They just want, people to be happy, I guess, with the game. That's one philosophy of approaching it. Assuming that players know best what they want, rather than the developers knowing better than what community wants. Okay, so now the discussion. As for PV, let's start with that. Decreasing the PV maximum tier from 5 to 3. In ideal world, I would like it to stay at 5. I think that is the best, because from tier 5 you gain ultimate abilities, right? So just let people learn until tier 5 against PvE, and then from tier 6, that's important, I think, to not have that overlap of PvE and PvP, so that once people reach the PvP tiers, they don't try to match in PvP, because PvE is much more popular. Obviously, again, in the ideal world, you would have a healthy game population, which would pop queue for any tiers, any game mode, being it PvE or PvP, at any time. But that isn't the case, right? Hence the matchmaking trial changes. But yeah, let's say in the most ideal, I would still maybe keep it like PvE up to tier 5, and then PvE, okay, in the semi-ideal, from tier 5, up to tier 5 for PvE, and then PvP from tier 6 to 10. So you learn through the first half of the tiers, you reach your ultimate ability, you learn how to abuse them, how they work, etc., still against bots, and once you go into tier 6, you're going against real players. Because right now, a huge problem is that, or rather before the matchmaking trial changes, right? PvP starts from tier 3, and people would already try to start queuing for PvP battles at tier 3, and then they couldn't find battles at tier 3, PvP battles at tier 3, because PvE was much more popular, and almost nobody was queuing for PvE, or at least not 20 people at the same time to trigger the matchmaking, right? I mean, at certain times of the day, during Chinese prime time, it is possible, but outside of Chinese prime time, it was a rare occurrence, very rare occurrence, to have that happen. Because PvE would simply prevail, because it's easier key to pop, and it's also faster to farm. So it just has those two advantages that people gravitate towards, essentially. And after they spend a certain amount of times in the PvP queue, they just default to PvE after not being able to fight. So that just kind of dooms PvP queues that are on the same tier that PvP is. Sorry, that PvE is, right? So yeah, I would make a clear distinction: up to this tier PvE, after that tier PvP, no overlap. I think that's important. And whether that distinction is between tier 5 and 6, or the border, or the border is between 3 and 4, or whatever, just make the border clear, right? And if you need to have overlap, the less overlap the better. So right now it would be only one tier of overlap. The PvE size being reduced from 10 to 8. Okay, that makes the queues pop easier, but what I've been saying, and I've seen a lot of people saying that as well, either just agreeing with me or coming to the same conclusion themselves, essentially, which is a very easy conclusion to make that is present in many other games, is that in PvE battles, if the players cannot find a queue, like you cannot find 10 players, just fill the rest of the slots with AI as well. Nobody will really care about their team being filled with AI. In AI matches, to be precise, right? Let's take World of Warships as the closest example. You queue up for PvE there to test your ship, your new ship, to learn how it works, to test your new commander, new unit, new type, whatever, right? Or just to grind through. You have that PvE as a learning curve up to tier 3, tier 5, tier 6, whatever you choose. Right, and just fill the remaining slots with bots. I know Conqueror's Blade did this as well, and nobody really cared. Nobody doesn't really complain about it because there's no reason to. So, after X amount of minutes, being 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, if the matchmaking cannot find enough human players, just fill the rest of the human team with AI as well. And then it would be 5 human players plus 5 AI players versus 10 AI players. And I really cannot see anybody really complaining about that. And AI would probably still be a little bit better than half of those players that are still learning, right? And now on the subject of AI, how they perform while they are in human teams in PvP, because that's the only time that occurs. Well, on PvE, if somebody disconnects, then that occurs as well, right? But that would be now much more common if that filling with AI change would be introduced. So, if it is in PvE, and it's the bot team, the versus humans team, the team that is against humans that is filled with AI, just not to confuse it with versus humans queue, because that's what it's called here. Just keep it as it is, right? But if it's the AI that fills up the slots for the human players, the AI doesn't understand how to play alongside players, because it will think that only other AI players exist. So when somebody disconnects in a PvP match and it's replaced by AI, and it makes the game 9v10 essentially, because the AI will think that it's the only player on the battlefield. At least that's what I think is happening. And when it is the only player on the battlefield, it thinks the best thing to do is camp inside the base, or in a little bit better case scenario, camp on top of a point. Right, but it will never go forward because it's programmed that way that half of the players, of AI players, go forward and half stay behind. But if it's the only one, it will just stay behind and will just camp on top of a point, or worst case scenario, on top of a base. And essentially that makes all battles, PvP battles that AI is involved in, 9v10, 8v10, or whatever. I mean, if it's two AI disconnected, then one of them should camp and one of them should go forward. But if you have 2 points, then maybe one of them will camp on the left side point and the other one will camp on the right side point. And to even make it more obvious, I even have one battle that will be published sometime in the future. Maybe I'll change the schedule so that it's published earlier. We did have a battle that was 8v10. We had 2 disconnected players pretty much from the very beginning. One disconnected at the very beginning during loading, and the second one soon after. It was 8v10. And we managed to win that battle because we managed to snowball very quickly. And in Arena, it's very difficult to come back from a deficit. Like once you lose a point, it is extremely difficult to take it back. And I've been saying that for quite a while. Like, showing tournament battles as a proof, or even random battles that was very apparent in. But if a team that is 2 players ahead, it's 10v8, cannot come back into battle that they started losing early, I mean, that kind of really, really proves the point. Like, they cannot come back 10 versus 8 with 2 players of advantage. So what I would like to see, at least I guess we're finally getting to that point, after a lot of my rambling. Maybe I should have structured that news video, but, well, didn't have time to do so. I just want to push out the news as quickly out there as quickly as possible. There we go. So what I want to do, what I would like to see, is the AI that is present in human teams, whether it be PvE or PvP when somebody disconnects. It would not be the same version as we see in PvE for the enemy team. And now I have a phone call. And I'm back. Yeah. Please, Araki, don't go after me. Well, I guess Araki doesn't really hold the rights to the soundtrack. Whoever made the soundtrack, please don't go after me. That was just a few seconds, or maybe I'll just cut it out. I don't know. So I was talking about how I want the AI that replaces humans to be different than AI that is, just for humans to beat in PvE, right? So I want that iteration of AI to be what it was at the very beginning of the Chinese version. Like, that AI was actually pretty decent. It was on a level of an average player. It would never heal, it would never camp, it would always go and push forward. So it would still be worse than an average teammate, right? Because it's always doing the same thing, it's always predictable, but it was, by being predictable, it was also reliable. Like, you would know what to expect out of AI, and you could play around it as a teammate, right? And it's definitely much, much better than having AI just camp in your base or your point. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. It's still pretty much 9 versus 10, or however many players would disconnect, right? And then they nerfed like the aggression of the AI as well. So yeah, I want that, like, all the pre-nerfs AI to be the one that replaces humans. And you could argue that maybe in some cases when a player is really, really bad, him disconnecting and being taken over by AI would be a little bit better, right? Because the AI would actually be better than the player. In some extreme cases of being a noob, yes. But I still think, like, vast majority of the population is better even than that AI, at least the one that plays PvP. And also the fact that AI, again, is always predictable. The good players on the enemy team would always be able to outplay the AI and, like, nullify it. But at least that AI would do something, like go forward, apply some pressure, allow other human players to play around it, and it would still keep it pretty much even. Because at this time, at the moment, if somebody disconnects and is taken over by AI, that's like, well, I guess we are playing 9v10. That's not going to be fun. So, yeah. From 2 evils, let's say, I think the one that I presented is much, much lesser evil. Smaller evil in that case. I don't know. English grammar. There we go. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for the AI changes, both in PvE and on PvP. As for tier bands, yeah, the 3 to 10, that's not going to be fun either, because tier 3 units, tier 4 units don't have access to the ultimate abilities of commanders. And also, the lower the tier, you have fewer unit abilities, fewer consumables available to you, and those abilities and consumables are weaker. I mean, not abilities not necessarily, right, because they're like percentages, but and again, consumables are also percentages, but yeah, they're just weaker relatively also as well, right, because they're working off of smaller values. So they're nerfing the differences between the tiers, which is, I guess, good. Essentially, they just pulled the data from the Sunset patch, which is kind of a worrying thing to say, right, and a painful memory to recall in this day and age, but that's what they're doing. And that's why it was quite easy for them to apply, I guess, because they already had that data set. They just kind of adjusted it to whatever changes they made since then, and I guess the Chinese faction that appeared. And well, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, being a tier 3 player in a tier 10 battle is not going to be fun, I can tell you that. And now you cannot even grind up to tier 5 in PvE to essentially, like, shield you from the tier 10 battles. So that is going to be tough to newer players, but at least the newer players should be able to find battles much more easily. So again, it's a trade-off, because I think up to that point a lot of new players were just leaving because they couldn't find the battles. So again, out of the two evils, it's better to have them find battles faster, or just find battles at all, and have those battles be kind of unbalanced between tier 3 and tier 10. That's an extreme case, right? But it will most likely occur even quite often, I imagine. We'll see how that goes. And CA will also see. It's an experiment after all. Yeah. I think those changes are more or less appropriate to the situation we're in. So that's good on CA for finally recognizing that it took them a while. But they aren't the best solutions. So again, to summarize, instead of dropping the team size from 10 to 8, just have the player teams be filled up with AI. That shouldn't be hard to do. Change the AI that is in teams that players are present in, the human players are present in, to be the first version of AI you had before all the nerfs and changes to AI behavior. Then figure out what you need to do with PvP, and hopefully it won't be this. I think the previous was pretty good, but overall there are much more other factors that come to matchmaking, like for example battle length, battle duration. Like battles are much longer now, so if battles were to be made shorter, that would also be that would also contribute to the matchmaking being better. I actually think I already provided feedback about it quite extensively in my what was it, tweaking the game mode video, I believe that's what it was called, where I talked about how we could change this game mode that we currently have to be better, and also if the old game mode would return alongside the current one, that would also make progress and matchmaking much healthier, I think, because it forced the change into the progress that the scaling with time would now be much more important, and should be made much more fair in that scenario of two games with various game length being present in matchmaking simultaneously. And that would also silence a lot of criticism from, oh, the old game mode was better. It was still like, oh, I hate it when I get the new game mode. I prefer if I could only get the old game mode. But you would have the arguments from the other side. Like, there are people who prefer the new game mode over the old one. And I'll probably make a video that would explain the differences between the two, because I still see like really dumb comments like, oh, why do I need to finish off the units if they're just going to respawn? Like, there's no point, there's no strategy because there's respawning. Like, why bother killing units, etc, etc, like, or why care about them, or care about losing them if I can just respawn them? And there's a really not very well thought through sentences, like feedback that you want to provide, because the game is much deeper than that. But to give some credit to those people, they are essentially right, because the healing is fast, the healing zones are very close to the capture points, and that kind of makes healing and respawning OP. Like, it's stronger than the XP advantages that you're getting for killing the units. And if you want to be super smart and retreat after winning the initial engagement, that makes the battles much longer, which also doesn't help. And you know, those are all those multiple factors that stack on top of one another, making the battles longer and perceived to be less fun or less deep, let's say, in tactics and strategy available for the players, that are valid ways to win. Like they're somewhat correct, but not for the right reasons, not for the reasons they present. So that's kind of weird thing to see, but whatever. I'll do another video discussing that in the future, and maybe I'll even just make this video into 2 separate videos so that people don't see, oh, that's a news video that's 25 minutes long. Fuck that, right? Well, the news is covered within the first 4 minutes. So I just split this video in 2, have the first 4 minutes uploaded as a news video, and then have the other remaining 21 or 22 minutes of this video as the separate discussion for it. Yeah, I think that's what I'll do. So until then, until I publish those videos, I don't know, until my next video, whatever, I'll see you on Arena's Battlefield, on new matchmaking rules and double XP weekend. Unless you're watching this video later or whatever, then I'll just see you on the regular Arena Battlefields. Unless they don't revert them and have them stay. Whatever the case will be. I'll see you there on Arena's Battlefields, that's for certain.